Today on Aussie Arvos, we're putting a winch on the 80 series, but not just any winch. We are rebuilding a 20-year-old worn High Mount Winch that hasn't seen any action in over 10 years. This very winch has a lot of sentimental value and has been all over Australia, but it's been parked up in the shed for a long time, so it's time to pull it apart, rebuild it, and give it a new life on the 80 series. And at the end of the video, we'll be putting the rebuild to the test, dead pulling the 3-ton 80 series up a steep hill. So if you've been watching closely over the past few months, you would have noticed that my 80 series is actually missing a winch. Now, there's a very good reason for that. So I wasn't going to film this because I was just basically repairing the winch because the winch is not working. It clicks, but it doesn't actually move. I just opened the solenoid box and I had to go grab the camera because it is in such bad condition. Oh my god. So not only had a colony of spiders moved into my solenoid box, it was looking pretty worse for wear. So I decided to pull the whole winch out and get a better look on what was happening internally.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, there's some...
Well, it wasn't looking good. So as you can see, the winch has pretty much had it. It's quite an old winch, and look at inside, there's a lot of corrosion and it hasn't had a good life. So, what are we gonna do? Is it possible to rebuild this? Probably. I know Warren's still pretty good with their parts. You can actually literally rebuild all their winches from the ground up essentially, but we've got something new going on. This is a Warren High Mount Winch. Now, this has been kindly donated to me by a mate who's used it on his car for years and years and years, so it's been all over Australia. It's got history to it. I'm not sure what the internals are like. We're gonna go and look into that obviously today, but we're hopefully gonna be rebuilding this Warren High Mount Winch and putting it on the 80 series. Now, why High Mount? Well, a lot of people have commented about this bull bar on the 80 series and said, get an out of B-bar, this bar looks crap. But if you come here and notice, the winch cradle size in here is enormous. This is actually designed to fit a high mount winch. That's why the whole bar is off-centered to fit a high mount. So we'll have to cut out these lights and stuff and kind of rearrange how you want to put them in. But we have test fisted this winch and it does fit. So high mount winch on the 80 series, got to rebuild the Warren winch first, and then hopefully we can install it. It'll all fit up, and yeah, high mount. So why pick a high mount? Let me explain. So the difference between a high mount winch and a low mount winch. So this is my low mount winch here off the 80, which I pulled off. As you can see, it's a Warren 10,000 pound winch. It's quite a big unit, but obviously this has been stripped down. So there is a few differences between the high mounts and the low mounts. Obviously the high mount being the motor is mounted above the drum, whereas on a low mount winch, the motor is actually bolted on the side of the winch. So now obviously there's difference between how power is moved from the motor down to the drum, obviously because this is side on side. They're sort of driven by a cone system where here there's multiple gears inside this housing that actually have gear oil in them all the time, which then deliver the power down here to the drum. Another thing you'll notice that the high mount winch are a lot more modifiable. You can put bigger motors on them, you can put a lot more cable on them. There's heaps of mods and aftermarket stuff you can do on them to make them faster, stronger, all that. The high mounts you see on every single comp truck out there because that's the most modifiable, they're the strongest, they're the fastest. This is what they use. But there is one mod I'm doing to make this new high mount even more reliable. In terms of the way they're electronically switched, they were just using the same solenoid box, which is a pretty standard solenoid box you've probably seen in your winch before. They're quite big. This is the internal side of one of them. So as you can see, you've got your solenoids, and this essentially allows the switch to be switched to, you know, forward, run in, run out, all that. Now, there are some negatives to this system, and you'll see if you talk to, you know, a bunch of the guys doing comp truck and making those comp spec winches, they basically throw these solenoids right in the bin. And that's because if you've owned a winch, probably the first thing to fail on them is the solenoids. And that's because, imagine, you're going through bog holes and stuff, mud's getting in here because there's no real watertight seal in this at all. Liam's had this issue on his winch where the solenoid simply stopped working, so we had to pull it all apart, clean the solenoids and put it back together. So, the winching guys have got a new solenoid they use, and I'll show you what it looks like. This is called an Albright solenoid, and it's manufactured by Albright. And as you can see, it's a lot smaller than this solenoid here. But there is one major difference between the Albright and the old style. This is completely watertight. So, whereas this you were getting mud and water all into, you can stick this under your engine bay and it's all water sealed. And essentially, I've been told this is the way basically to keep your winch working all the time. So this cost me about 175 bucks. But you see you got your 4 pins on there. pins here for your switching, and then you can run it out to, you can run to a rocker switch on your car, you can run it to a winch controller, you can run it to whatever you want. So I'm gonna be installing an Albright solenoid instead, running on the High Mount Winch. So I'm not really that familiar with winches. I've never really had one on a car that's worked. So I have a lot to learn in how this all operates and works. These worn High Mount A274s are actually worth a bit of money these days as well. So it's definitely an item you don't want to throw away. There's plenty of rebuild kits for them online. So I thought, you know what, we'll give it a try. We'll rebuild it and yeah, hopefully get it on the car and get a worn High Mount. All right, so we actually have the winch now on the bench and we're gonna start pulling it apart. Basically, so you start, take this top motor off, this case off, and then we're gonna basically look inside and check out all the internals, check out all the seals, bearings, and just see what condition they're in before I start, purchasing parts to rebuild it. So, yeah, basically, start Valentine's and start taking this thing apart. This is probably the first time it's been apart in what, like 10 years?
Oh, yeah, at least, probably more. I reckon I would have got it nearly 20 years ago.
Once we removed the upper casing, we could have a look inside and see that it actually had grease running in it, but it was in really good condition. It wasn't bound up, everything looked well. So we continued and pulled out the brake assembly and the main gears inside. We broke everything down into its individual components so it could be cleaned thoroughly. We then removed the lower housing and checked everything for wear. It was all looking pretty good at this stage. I then removed the clutch assembly and then the electric motor itself.
See the corrosion? Yeah.
Once we had the electric motor apart, we could see that there was a bit of corrosion on the armature and the housing itself. The brushes were a bit worn down, some of the springs weren't really working too well, but we were confident that we'd be able to clean all this up and get it working. So we disassembled the rest of the winch, and then we got stuck into the big job, which was cleaning it all. Now I'm learning that cleaning is obviously a huge part of mechanical work, and we had to ensure that each component was spotless from grease or grime. The cable that was on the High Mount was pretty much knackered. It was destined for the scrap, so I ripped all that off and started giving all the housings a good clean. Being a winch, being mounted on the front of the car, obviously meant it was covered in a lot of dirt and grime, but it was nothing but a degreaser and petrol could remove. And for electronic components like the armature that had corroded, we were able to spin up on the lathe and make them look literally brand new, cleaning all the comm bars. All right, so we've still been stripping down everything. But as you can see, everything is getting a lot cleaner. As you can see, we've cleaned up the armature on the lathe. We also went over and cleaned the actual casings and the motor itself on the outside, so it's all looking nice and shiny and like brand new. There is, however, one part that we're gonna need to replace, and that is the bearing for the armature. Now this is obviously a pretty vital bearing in the operation of the motor and of course the winch. As you can see, it's sort of all bubbled up and yeah, it needs to be replaced. So luckily these are quite a common bearing, bearing 6203RS. So my dad's gonna quickly go pick one up and then yeah, we'll have a new bearing to put on the armature. Now I've just been cleaning every component very thoroughly. Obviously we want it ultra clean on the inside, and if we can get it clean on the outside and make it look pretty, that's also good as well. So been using just a bit of petrol, degreaser, and just cleaning it all very thoroughly. Just like I say in all the other mechanical stuff we do, cleaning is always the longest part. It's the most time consuming, the most tedious, but it is probably one of the most important parts. And after cleaning everything, these parts looked basically brand new. We did mention earlier that there was a spring on the motor that wasn't quite pushing out the brush properly, so we did luckily have springs on my old winch that we're able to steal and use on our new refurbished motor.
That's got a spring out.
And with everything cleaned, it was time to reassemble the High Mount Winch. Now the worn High Mount does go back together really pretty straightforward. It's quite simple to do. There are a few tiny little finicky bits, just like all these ball bearings and the brake assembly, which you have to have just in the right position when you push it down on the spring, otherwise they'll jump out. You have to go reassemble them all back on the right position, push it down to get the circle clip on, but apart from that, it's really a pretty straightforward rebuild. We decided to lubricate the gears with grease rather than gear oil, but I'll talk about this later. So we siliconed everything back together, put the case back on, reattached our brake lever, hammered in our new bearing for our armature, reattached the motor, and sitting in front of us was a newly rebuilt, worn High Mount Winch. Alright, so I'm in the car. You might be wondering why I'm in the car. So, well, last night we finished reassembling the winch. And once it was all back together, we did notice there was a little bit of slop in the brake. And this is because there's a brass bushing there which sits between it and the housing, and this had a little bit of play in it. It wasn't sitting perfectly, you know. Obviously, you know, I think the housing had worn down a bit over the years and the bushing itself had worn down a bit over the years. So what we're gonna do is fabricate our own new brass bushing that'll make up for that, you know, worn down of the housing and for the worn downness of the bush. So we'll make our own little brass bushing. It's gonna go into that. Daz is gonna help me make that up on the lathe. What I'm doing right now is actually heading down to buy some new components, because we did notice that the needle roller bearing wasn't, look, it wasn't in great condition. It had a little bit of play in it, and if we're gonna go through and, you know, make this a proper rebuild, we really want to replace that component. So I'm gonna get a new needle roll bearing, and we're also gonna get a new lower service kit for the drum. So this includes a new seal that we actually noticed on the drum was a little loose, and that's one of the main reasons we didn't fill it with oil, is because there were seals on that had a little bit of play in them, a little bit of slop, and if we had you know, filled it up with oil, it probably would have leaked a little bit. So we're doing it properly. We're gonna get some new seals for that, and it should all be running great. We're probably still gonna use grease in it, because that one winch had grease in it. That's what it ran for the past 15 years, and look at the condition the components are in. They're in bloody good nick. So for the amount of times I'm gonna use the winch, I think grease will be fine. If you're gonna be using the one winch like a comp truck and use it, you know, 3 times a week, you know, for long duration of hours, getting it really hot and stuff, probably using oil is a good idea. But I think for me, using it once in a blue moon, the grease will do fine. So yeah, we'll head down to a local Fulby shop now, get these components, and yeah, get the winch back together. So now I had a genuine lower service kit from Warn and a genuine needle roll bearing also from Warn. I did notice though that the needle roll bearing was made in China, but the other seals were made in the United States.
I'll check that. Okay, so that's done.
Yep, so now I can start putting it back together. We then, on the lathe, made our new brass bushing, and it was really cool to see this, because we essentially made a bushing just from a bit of brass we had lying around. So it just shows the power of a lathe. They are really cool tech. We then again started the process of reassembling the winch. And this is the final product of our brass bushing, which allowed the brake assembly to sit in the housing perfectly with no play. Alright, so we've replaced all the bearings now, and we're beginning to actually rebuild the winch. I are currently painting some components, just the components that aren't aluminium, that are metal, that will rust as soon as it basically goes in the car for a couple of weeks. So we're painting them satin black, and then doing the rest of the install now. So it shouldn't take long to assemble it now, and then basically it's time to put on the car, which we do have some modifications to do to the lights and stuff on the bull bar, so we'll have to rearrange the lighting and everything, but it should all go together. And then we'll have to get some steel cable, which I'm gonna borrow off the old winch, because the winch cable that was on this Warn winch was, yeah, cooked. So let's get rebuilding, get on the car.
Professionals of these now.
Yeah, rebuilding. And there it was, the rebuilt Warn High Mount Winch. After being cleaned up, this thing looked so good. It looked brand new. I was so excited to get it in the 80. So all we had to do now was take out the lights. We actually had to cut the brackets we made previously to fit in the high mount, because the top casing would hit. So we chopped out those brackets. And used the block and tackle to lift the winch up into the bull bar. Yeah. And this time around, we're going to be running the roller fair lead off the bottom mounted holes. This is because with the high mount, we want the rope to be coming off the bottom of the winch drum. If it was coming, spooling from the top down, the winch brake wouldn't actually work. And I think having it pull from a lower point of the vehicle would actually encourage like the nose of the vehicle to pull up when you're trying to get out of a bog hole. So with it all mounted, it was time to try the winch and spool in some cable.
That says even more.
It's just something about a high mount. It's the sound, it's, you know, the brake spinning around. It's just an awesome old school winch, and a winch that's still made to this day. So we spooled in the rest of the cable. I put about 30 meters or so on there, so I obviously could put a lot more cable on there, but that's all my old winch had on it. So we spooled all that in. We then made up a bracket for the old bright solenoid to attach to. I was going to put it just in front of my battery and have all the wires right next to it, and then run the wires from there down to the winch. We then also made a new bracket for the number plate to mount on, as obviously was changing location, so the number plate was in a better place, it was in a more roadworthy place, that was great, so we made a little bracket up there, mounted the number plate on, and it was ready. So, what's the best... No, it's the first time you actually use the recovery gear, yes. That's because I haven't had a way to recover myself, so I haven't used the gear yet. So what's the best way to find out if your winch works? Well, it's actually test it under load. So we got a bit of a hill climb here, just around the back from our house. Liam's gonna be my runner. He's gonna run all the gear up the hill. Yeah, run out the winch and see how it goes winch me up. Liam's gonna run the winch out for me. I'm gonna get in the car because there's no handbrake and start it. And yeah, let's go. That one's yours. Let me go jump in the car. I've also gone ahead and bought a wireless winch controller, so this problem's going to be not around for much longer.
Not an unusual situation here, Toyota winching, but it's up. We've all been there.
Hope there's enough cable on it. It is quite long.
Maybe just come forward a touch.
Now, because I actually am running cable, it's going to be dragging along the ground a lot here. But because I am running cable, that shouldn't be an issue, so.
Alright, here we go. I'd say it's probably worth mentioning that this is no steam of the car. This is all the winch.
It's not in gear. This is the entire winch pulling up the hill. This is the full load test, and it's doing pretty well.
Yeah, considering, so this is just carrying essentially 3-ton dead weight.
It's pulling 3-ton dead weight up the hill. Alright, let's put it in the vehicle. Alright, well, it made it up the hill. What are your thoughts on speed? Do you think that the voltage was getting too low on it? I reckon
it did sound like it didn't have much.
I reckon it sounded like it needed more power, like almost like these cables need to be thicker.
Yeah, potentially. I don't know. Like, I would say it's just the dead weight of the car, but then at the same time, like, think about the amount of times that people use high mounts, like in mud, where they literally
well, exactly right,
and they use just the car.
I just feel like it should have been going a bit faster than that.
Yeah, like I feel, and it was just like it sounded like it was really bogging down.
Yeah, it did. We're gonna have a think on that one. Because yeah, I just felt like it would have had more power, or it should have had more power. But yeah, it's pretty hot, the motor too.
I mean, that was working pretty hard.
Oh, it was, yeah. Like I mean, it's up a pretty steep slope, but
yeah,
I guess,
and for a fairly prolonged period.
Yeah,
I guess. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's. I can't really remember. I'm trying to think of when I used my low mount, how slow it is. Because my low mount's slow. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
maybe that's just. I don't know.
Maybe that was just it.
Like it worked.
It got me out of it.
Like I didn't
want to stop.
Nah.
It didn't really want to slow down. I just sort of gave it a break.
Even when you were giving it revs, it didn't seem like it was
getting any faster. Because when I had it on, it went down the volt gauge down to probably, I reckon my starter battery would have been on like 12 volts.
Probably less.
Probably. So
it was sucking a lot of juice.
It was sucking a lot of juice. And to be fair, I haven't driven the car in a couple of days, but like, because we literally just took the car out then, drove it here in 2 minutes, then started doing it. Haven't driven the car in probably.
A new battery?
Yeah, it's less than a year old.
High output one?
Yeah, it's a Century. It's a good one.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's just, well, I feel like the thing of this is the comments will be able to tell us straight away whether you thought that was standard.
Yeah.
Or whether you felt like it needed more juice.
Let me know, was it going too slow?
Because if power's not the issue, then what else could it be? Is it like the motor? But then what's that to do? That's like the brushes and the coil, how good all the...
I guess so, yeah, how good the actual, you know, the motor is.
But it works, at least you got a winch now.
Yeah, yeah.
It does work.
The mechanicals of it worked, they just needed more power.
And other things too, like when it's not, like it's fast, like obviously a winch is faster when it's just free spooling. But like this is like, it's fast when it's not under load, which any winch is faster when it's not under load, but this is like fast. So I wouldn't have expected it to drop that much lower.
Nah. So I don't know.
Something to think about?
Something to think about. And so that's the video on the Warren High Mount Winch. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. And if you want to support the channel further, you can buy a sticker at aussiearvos.com.au. They're $5, they're free shipping Australia-wide, and it really helps the channel out. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next Sunday.